The first thing I noticed about the house was how it breathed. Not in the literal sense, I'm not spinning ghost stories here, but in that ineffable way, old houses seem to expand and contract with the weather. That April afternoon, as Seattle's perpetual drizzle tapped against the windows, I stood in what could have been my living room and felt the structure inhale around me. The oak floorboards creaked under my careful steps, not in protest, but in acknowledgement. "Here you are," they seemed to say. "We've been waiting." "What do you think, Mr. Voss?" The realtor, Diane, I think, hovered by the doorway, her voice cutting through my reverie. The previous owners maintained the original woodwork, not something you see often in this neighborhood anymore. "It's Martin," I said, running my fingertips along the windowsill. "Martin Voss." Funny how even after 12 years, correcting someone on my name still felt like a confession. Martin was my middle name, my mother's choice, a family tradition. Elliot was my first name, my father's choice, his name. When I left home at 22, I left Elliot behind too. Small acts of rebellion sometimes make the loudest statements. "The wood's beautiful," I said, noting how the late afternoon light filtered through the dusty blinds, catching golden particles suspended in air. "Everything is." And it was. The bones of the place were solid. A 1940s craftsman with good insulation, updated plumbing, and enough character to feel like more than just four walls and a roof. In the kitchen, subway tiles gleamed under recessed lighting. The bedrooms upstairs were modest but warm, each with windows that faced east. Morning light. New beginnings. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. After years of renting, of temporary addresses and security deposits I'd never see again, this house represented something I'd been chasing since I was old enough to understand what the word home was supposed to mean. Permanence, safety, a place that wouldn't dissolve when relationships or jobs or moods shifted, a place that was mine. "I'll take it," I told Diane, not even bothering to hide the slight tremor in my voice. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "Don't you want to sleep on it?" "I've been sleeping on it for 10 years, I said. "I'm ready." 2 days later, I sat at my desk in my rented apartment, fingers hovering over my keyboard. The email to my father was drafted, edited, and ready to send. Subject line: House funds transfer. Professional. Detached. As if I were writing to a business associate rather than the man who taught me how to ride a bike. "Dad, hope this finds you well. As discussed on our call, I'm proceeding with the house purchase. The closing date is set for May 15th. I've initiated the transfer of $72,000 to your account today. As agreed, please hold these funds until the closing date, at which point they'll be transferred to the escrow account I'll provide. Thank you for your help with this. It means a lot. Best, Martin." I read it once more before clicking send. The words, "it means a lot," stared back at me, simultaneously true and inadequate. After years of minimal contact, holiday phone calls, the occasional update email, this transaction represented more than just money. It was a bridge, tentatively extended, a chance for him to show up for me in a way he seldom had before. The call that preceded this email had been warmer than our usual exchanges. Dad had sounded genuinely pleased about the house, asked questions about square footage and the neighborhood. When I mentioned needing a temporary place to park my down payment until closing, he'd offered immediately. "I've got that account that's just sitting there gathering dust," he'd said. "Perfect place to keep it safe until you need it. No need to pay bank fees." I'd hesitated, but only briefly. Maybe this was how we started again. Maybe this was how trust began to rebuild, in small, practical steps. The transfer itself was painless. $72,000, the product of 7 years of frugal living, disappearing from my account with a chime from my banking app. I'd never seen that much money in my possession before. Not because I hadn't earned it, my freelance software development work paid well enough, but because I'd never let myself spend it. Every dollar was sacred, earmarked for this exact purpose: a foundation. Roots. Dad's reply came that evening. Received. All set. Proud of you, kiddo. 5 words that warmed me more than they should have. I slept soundly that night. The first week passed without incident. I toured the house again, this time with a home inspector who confirmed what I already suspected. The place was solid. I sent measurements to Nina, my ex-girlfriend turned reluctant friend, who had offered to help me think about furniture placement. I started packing non-essentials into boxes labeled with room names that didn't yet belong to me. Kitchen, guest room, office, room names that didn't yet belong to me. Kitchen, guest room, office. The second week, I noticed Dad hadn't answered my email about the final paperwork I'd need from him. No big deal. He was busy. I sent a text instead. By the third week, the silence had grown from curious to concerning. My texts showed as delivered, but not read. Emails went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. When I called his office, his assistant said he was unavailable, in a tone that suggested this wasn't temporary. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I finally admitted to myself what was happening. I was sitting at my kitchen counter, rain tapping against the window, in that familiar Seattle rhythm, a mug of coffee cooling untouched beside my laptop. I'd been staring at my email inbox for nearly an hour, refreshing every few minutes as if persistence alone could conjure a response. The realization didn't crash over me. It seeped in slowly, like water through soil, until suddenly I was saturated with it. He wasn't going to answer. The money was gone. And with it, the house. My house. I remember the strange detachment of that moment, how I calmly closed my laptop, carried my untouched coffee to the sink, and poured it down the drain. How I walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub, waiting for the wave of emotion that had to be coming. Anger, perhaps. Betrayal. Grief. But all I felt was a dull, factual certainty. A quiet voice saying, "Of course. Of course, this is how it ends." That night, I dreamed of my childhood bedroom. The posters on the walls, planets and spaceships, later replaced by bands my father deemed acceptable, shifted and changed as if I were watching a time-lapse of my youth. In the dream, I sat on the bed while my mother folded laundry beside me. Her hands, gentle and sure, creating neat stacks of t-shirts and jeans. "He doesn't mean to forget," she said, though I hadn't asked a question. "He just gets caught up in his own orbit." Even in sleep, I recognized the familiar excuse, the way she'd always translated my father's absences into something more palatable, less like abandonment, more like distraction, an honest mistake. Sarah Voss had been the mediator, the buffer zone, the translator between my father's world and mine. When she died, I was 15, sophomore year, a brain aneurysm that took her in her sleep. She left behind a language gap neither of us knew how to bridge. I woke from the dream with her scent in my nostrils, lavender and something uniquely her, and the hollow ache of an old wound reopened. 3 days later, after leaving 17 increasingly desperate voicemails on my father's phone, I received a terse email from him that simply read, "Martin, there's been a temporary complication with accessing these funds. Working to resolve. Will update soon." No explanation, no apology, not even the pretense of concern for what this complication might mean for me. Just the professional distance of a business update. I called anyway, straight to voicemail. I emailed back, asking for specifics, for a timeline, for any information that might help me explain to the seller why my down payment might be delayed. No response. That night, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, searching my father's name online. Elliot Voss wasn't famous, but as the founder of a mid-sized financial software company, he had enough of a digital footprint to trace. The third result down stopped my scrolling cold. A headline from a local business journal, dated just last week: Voss Corp under scrutiny. Audit reveals potential irregularities. The article was locked behind a paywall, but the snippet visible in the search results was enough. Triggered by automated audit software, raising questions about financial practices at the company founded by Elliot Voss 17 years ago. I paid the $8.99 for a digital subscription and read the full piece 3 times, each pass revealing another layer of sick irony. Voss Corp, my father's company, was under investigation for financial mismanagement. An automated audit had flagged discrepancies in their accounts. The board had called for a full review. And the audit software they were using? I'd helped build it. 4 years ago, during my brief partnership with Miles Trent at his startup, we designed it specifically to catch the kind of shell games my father was apparently playing. I closed my laptop and pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw stars. Outside, rain pelted against my windows with increasing intensity, as if the weather itself were building towards some inevitable crescendo. My phone buzzed with a text. Nina. Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. House stuff going okay? I stared at her message for a long time before responding. Not really. Could use a friendly face. It wasn't like me to admit need so plainly. But then again, nothing about this situation was like the life I'd carefully constructed for myself. Controlled, independent, safe. Nina's reply came quickly. On my way. Got wine. As I waited for her to arrive, I stood at my window watching water stream down the glass, distorting the streetlights below into fragmented stars. In their warped glow, I saw a different future materializing, one without the house, without the foundation I'd been counting on. A future where I remained unanchored, adrift. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and closed my eyes, remembering the feel of those oak floorboards beneath my feet. The way the late afternoon light had painted the walls golden. The quiet inhale and exhale of a house that felt, just for a moment, like it could have been mine. Behind me, my laptop screen glowed in the dim room, the article still open. The name of the audit software, SecureCheck, stared back at me. A system I'd helped design. A system I knew intimately. A system with vulnerabilities only I and Miles would recognize. The thought came unbidden, as sudden and sharp as glass. I could destroy him with a keystroke. The realization should have horrified me. Instead, it settled over me with a strange, cold comfort, like finding a weapon when you'd thought yourself defenseless. By the time Nina knocked on my door, I'd made my decision. The rain had stopped, but the damage was already done. Some storms leave no visible wreckage, only the quiet devastation of what might have been. I was still standing at the window when Nina's knock came, 3 soft raps that seemed to punctuate the silence in my apartment. The rain had tapered to a mist, leaving the world outside glazed and reflective, streetlights smearing across wet pavement like watercolors bleeding on canvas. When I opened the door, Nina didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me with those dark, perceptive eyes that had always seen too much. Her curly hair was damp around her shoulders, and she held a bottle of red wine in one hand, a paper bag in the other. Without waiting for an invitation, she stepped inside, brushing past me with the familiar scent of sandalwood and something earthy I could never identify. "You look like shit," she said finally, setting her offerings on the kitchen counter. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation delivered with the unfiltered honesty that had once both attracted and unnerved me. "Thanks," I managed, closing the door. "It's been a rough week." Nina didn't push for details immediately. Instead, she moved through my kitchen with practiced ease, finding wine glasses, uncorking the bottle, pulling takeout containers from the paper bag, dumplings from the Chinese place on 4th that we used to frequent. The routine was so familiar that for a moment it was as if the past 2 years, our breakup, the awkward months of silence, the cautious rebuilding of something adjacent to friendship, had collapsed into nothing. "So," she said, handing me a glass of wine. "The house." I took a long sip before answering. "Gone. At least for now." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "The inspection?" "No." I set the glass down, pressed my palms flat against the counter. "My father. I transferred the down payment to him for safekeeping until closing. He's unavailable." Nina stared at me, comprehension dawning slowly on her face. "Jesus, Martin. How much?" 72,000. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was no pity there, just a quiet understanding that was somehow worse. Why would you trust him with that kind of money? It was the question I'd been asking myself for days, the one that had kept me awake at night staring at the ceiling. Why had I trusted him? Was it desperation for connection? Some childish hope that this time would be different? Or simply denial, willful blindness to the man my father had always been? I started, then shook my head. I don't know what I thought. Nina took a dumpling with chopsticks, placed it delicately on a plate, but didn't eat. "Have you reported it?" "It's not that simple." I walked back to my laptop, still open to the article about Voskhor. "His company's in trouble. An audit found irregularities. I'm guessing my money is temporarily solving those irregularities." Nina read over my shoulder, her presence warm behind me. "Wait, isn't this the software I helped develop with Miles?" "Yes." I closed the laptop. "Ironic, isn't it? The thing I built might be what caught him. And now—" I didn't finish the sentence, but Nina heard the unspoken conclusion anyway. She always did. "And now you're thinking about how to use it against him." She said it flatly, not a question. I reached for my wine again. "I know the back doors, Nina. I know exactly how to trigger a full audit that would freeze every account associated with Voskhor within 48 hours. Martin." Her voice held a warning note. "That's not justice. That's—" "What? Revenge?" I turned to face her fully. "Is it revenge to use a legal system exactly as intended? The audit software is doing its job. If I just help it do that job more efficiently, is that wrong?" Nina set her plate down. "You know it's more complicated than that." "Is it?" "He stole from me, Nina. He stole my future." "A house isn't a future. It's not just about the house." The words came out sharper than I intended, echoing in the quiet apartment. I lowered my voice. "It's about every science fair he missed, every time he promised to show up and didn't, every time I heard him tell his friends how proud he was of his son, the computer genius, when he couldn't even explain what I actually did." Nina didn't flinch at my outburst. She just watched me, her face composed, but her eyes soft. "I get it. I do. But this won't fix any of that. You know that, right?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked back to the window, watching the city lights blur through the last of the rain. Behind me, I heard Nina sigh, the soft clink of her wine glass on the counter. "What would Sarah say?" she asked quietly. The question cut through me like a blade, clean, precise, painful. My mother's gentle face flashed in my mind, her voice echoing from somewhere beyond memory. "We don't fix broken things by breaking more, Martin." "She's not here," I said finally. "She hasn't been here for a long time." The next morning, I called Miles Trent. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, not since our business partnership dissolved, not acrimoniously, but with the slow mutual recognition that we wanted different things. Miles had gone on to expand SecureCheck into a full-service financial auditing platform. I'd returned to freelance work, preferring the solitude and control. "Martin Voss," Miles answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the same laid-back warmth I remembered. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Don't tell me you're reconsidering my offer." 6 months ago, he'd reached out about bringing me back as a consultant. I'd declined politely, but firmly. "Not exactly," I said, staring at my computer screen where I'd already pulled up the publicly available documentation for SecureCheck's current version. "I need information about one of your clients, Voss Core Financial." A pause. "You know I can't discuss clients, Martin. It's my father's company." Another pause, longer this time. Miles was one of the few people who knew the complicated history there. Not all of it. No one knew all of it. But enough. "What's going on?" he asked finally. I gave him the abbreviated version, not the emotional undertow, just the facts, the house, the money, the sudden silence, the article. "Jesus," Miles muttered when I finished. I'm sorry, man." "I don't need sorry. I need information." My voice sounded strange in my own ears, harder than I'd intended, almost foreign. "The audit that was triggered, was it routine or targeted?" Miles sighed heavily. "You know I can't—" "Miles, please. He took everything I've been saving for years." The line went quiet for so long, I thought he might have hung up. Finally, "Routine. But it found enough to trigger secondary protocols." "Which means the board is reviewing everything now," I concluded. "And if someone were to submit evidence of additional irregularities, it would accelerate the process." Miles's voice turned cautious. "But Martin, think about what you're asking. If Voscor collapses under an audit, people lose jobs. Not just your father. Innocent people." "I'm not looking to collapse anything," I lied. "I just want my money back. There are legal ways to do that, which would take months or years." So I don't have months or years." The words burst out of me, raw and desperate. "I lose the house in 3 weeks if I don't have that deposit." Miles was quiet again. I could almost see him running his hand through his perpetually messy hair, a gesture he made when conflicted. "I can't help you use SecureCheck to target your father's company," he said finally. "That would be unethical and possibly illegal." "I'm not asking you to," I said, regaining control of my voice. "I'm just asking for access." "Access to what?" "The admin console. Just for a look. I helped build the foundation of this system, Miles. I have a right to see what it's become." It was a weak argument, and we both knew it. I had no rights to SecureCheck anymore. I'd signed those away when our partnership ended. "Martin." 1 hour, I pressed. "That's all I'm asking. Let me see the dashboard. No changes, no triggering audits. Just let me understand what's happening." The lie hung between us, as transparent as glass. Miles wasn't a fool. He knew exactly what I was planning. But perhaps something in my voice, the desperation, the barely contained anguish, reached him. 1 hour, he said finally. "Tomorrow morning, my office, and I'll be watching everything you do." After we hung up, I sat motionless at my desk, staring at the blank wall in front of me. A strange calm had settled over me. Not peace, but its dangerous cousin, resignation. A decision had been made, a path chosen. All that remained was to walk it. Miles's office occupied the 14th floor of a glass and steel building downtown. The space was open, bright, with the obligatory ping-pong table and cold brew tap that seemed standard issue for tech startups. Young programmers huddled over laptops at communal tables, while glass-walled conference rooms hummed with muted conversations. "Coffee?" Miles asked, leading me through the space. He'd changed little in 2 years, still lanky, still perpetually rumpled, as if his clothes and hair existed in a permanent state of creative dishevelment. "I'm good," I replied, acutely aware of curious glances from his employees. Ex-founder returns, a minor drama in their workday. Miles's private office was minimal, functional. A standing desk with dual monitors, a single plant that looked suspiciously artificial. No personal photos, no artwork. Miles had always kept his workspace deliberately sparse, a blank canvas for his thoughts, he'd once explained. He closed the door behind us, gestured to a chair. "Before we do this," he said, remaining standing, "I need to know what you're really planning, Martin. And don't tell me you just want to look." I met his gaze steadily. "I want to understand how my father used my money to patch holes in his company. I want to know if it's still there, somewhere in his accounts, or if it's gone. And if I find evidence of fraud, I'll submit it through proper channels." Miles studied me for a long moment. "You're a terrible liar. You always have been." "I'm not." "You're planning to initiate a targeted audit," he interrupted, "one that would freeze Voskor's accounts immediately. Don't deny it." I didn't. The lie had served its purpose. It had gotten me here. Now, honesty might be more effective. "You would do the same," I said quietly, "if someone took everything you'd worked for." "Maybe," Miles conceded, finally sitting down, "but I'd worry about collateral damage. I'm not trying to hurt innocent people. But you're willing to risk it to hurt him." The blunt assessment hung in the air between us. Was that what this was about? Hurting Elliot Voss? Making him feel even a fraction of the helplessness I'd felt sitting in that apartment, watching my future dissolve? "I just want what's mine," I said finally. Miles held my gaze a moment longer, then sighed and turned to his computer. "1 hour," he repeated, typing in his credentials, "and I'll be logging everything you do." The secure check dashboard appeared on screen, more sophisticated than the version I'd helped build, but with the same fundamental architecture. Miles pulled up a chair beside me, entered additional credentials, and brought up Voskor's file. "This is as far as I go," he said, standing. "I have a meeting. When I come back, you're done." "And Martin?" He paused at the door. "Don't do anything you can't undo." When the door closed behind him, I leaned forward, scanning the audit reports. The interface was intuitive, one of the features we'd been proudest of in the original design. Within minutes, I was navigating through Voskor's financial history, following the breadcrumbs the system had already flagged. The picture that emerged was grimly predictable. Voskor had been struggling for years, masked by increasingly creative accounting. My father had been moving money between accounts, delaying payments, creating the illusion of liquidity where none existed. And then, 7 days ago, a sudden influx of capital. $72,000. My money. The trail was so obvious that I almost laughed. He hadn't even tried to hide it. Maybe he didn't think he needed to. Maybe he never expected I would look. With growing coldness, I followed each transaction, each transfer. The money was still there, but fragmented now, dispersed across multiple accounts, like a constellation whose pattern only made sense when viewed from a distance. My future, scattered into pieces to prop up my father's failing company. I glanced at the time. 40 minutes had passed. Soon Miles would return, and this window would close. The trigger was right there. A simple command that would flag every suspicious transaction for immediate review, freezing all associated accounts while the investigation proceeded. 1 click. That's all it would take. My finger hovered over the key. In that moment, my father's face appeared in my mind. Not as he was now, a man in his 60s, graying and distant, but as he had been when I was 10 years old. I'd built a simple computer program for a science fair, nothing revolutionary, just a basic game with crude graphics. But I'd been proud of it, prouder than I'd ever been of anything. I'd shown it to him, expecting, what? Amazement? Pride? Recognition? He'd glanced at it briefly, nodded once, and said, "That's a good start. When you're ready to build something useful, I'll show you how." Years later, when I'd actually built something useful, the foundation for SecureCheck, I'd called to tell him. He hadn't answered. I'd left a message. He never called back. Now, staring at the trigger that could dismantle everything he'd built, I felt a strange emptiness where satisfaction should have been. This wasn't justice. Miles was right. This was something else entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from Nina. "Thinking of you. Whatever you decide, be sure it's what you need, not what he deserves." Her words struck me with unexpected force. What did I need? Not revenge. Not this cold satisfaction. I needed to be seen, to be chosen, to matter. The realization washed over me like a wave, leaving clarity in its wake. No amount of destruction could heal that particular wound. No targeted audit could fill that void. But as I moved to close the program, my eyes caught on something else. A series of transfers, smaller than mine, but following the same pattern. Other investments, other accounts, other people's futures, perhaps. My father hadn't just stolen from me. This was a pattern. Before I could reconsider, I initiated the audit. Not out of vengeance, but out of a strange, sudden sense of responsibility. Someone had to stop this. Someone had to say enough. The confirmation appeared on screen just as the office door opened. Miles took one look at my face and knew. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "What needed to be done?" I answered, standing. "I'm sorry." And I was. Not for triggering the audit. That felt oddly, unexpectedly right. But for the road that had led us here. For all of it. As I walked out of Miles's office, through the bright, bustling workspace filled with people who had no idea what had just happened, I felt neither triumph nor regret. Just a strange, hollow certainty that something had ended, and something else, something yet undefined, had begun. Outside, the Seattle sky had cleared. No rain, no mist, just an unusual and striking blue. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, looking up at that expanse, feeling smaller than I had in years. My phone buzzed again. "Nina, you okay?" I considered the question seriously before responding. Was I okay? Number not yet. Maybe not for a while. But I was something else, something I hadn't been before. I was awake. "I will be," I texted back, and started walking home through streets washed clean by the previous night's rain. The rain returned on the day I learned my father's company had collapsed. 3 days after the audit, 48 hours, just as Miles had predicted, Voscor Financial froze operations. The news came not from my father, but from a short article in the business section of the Seattle Times. Local fintech firm suspends operations amid financial irregularities. I read it on my phone while sitting at my kitchen counter, rain drumming against the windows in that persistent Seattle rhythm that had become the soundtrack to my unraveling. Outside, the world continued its rotation. Cars splashed through puddles, people hurried with umbrellas unfurled. Life moved forward in its relentless way. Inside, I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no relief. Just an emptiness that seemed to expand with each breath, threatening to swallow me whole. My phone rang, Nina calling. I let it go to voicemail. She'd been checking in daily since that afternoon in Miles's office, her concern evident in brief texts and voicemails that I'd answered with increasing brevity. "I'm fine. Just processing. Need some space. The truth was simpler and more complex. I didn't know how to explain the hollowness inside me, how the victory had turned to ash, how I'd won the battle but lost something essential in the process. 3 more days passed. I existed in a strange limbo, sleeping too much or not at all, forgetting to eat, then suddenly ravenous at 3 a.m. I turned down client work, ignored emails, let my carefully constructed routine disintegrate. The apartment grew quiet and still around me, a reflection of my internal landscape. On the 7th day after the audit, a letter arrived. Actual paper mail, handwritten address, my father's distinctive script on the envelope. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Physical evidence of connection I'd almost convinced myself never existed. Inside, a single page, more business correspondence than personal letter. Martin. By now you're aware of recent developments at Voscor. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending you weren't involved. The audit signatures were clear. What you may not know is that the company was already failing. Your intervention simply accelerated the inevitable. The money, your money, was a desperate attempt to plug a hole in a sinking ship. I told myself it was temporary, that I would return it once things stabilized. I believed my own lie until I couldn't anymore. This doesn't excuse what I did. Nothing could. I took what wasn't mine from the one person I should have protected above all others. There's no money to return now. Everything is frozen, tied up in legal proceedings that will likely stretch for years. I've retained enough legal counsel to know I'll be lucky to avoid criminal charges. I failed you as a father long before I failed you as a financial custodian. I have no right to ask forgiveness, so I won't. Elliot. No. I'm sorry. No, I love you. Just cold facts and colder acknowledgement. So like him. So perfectly, painfully him. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the anger to surge, for satisfaction to bloom. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, as if some internal storm had finally passed, leaving only quiet in its wake. I folded the letter carefully, placing it back in its envelope. Then I found a match, went to my small balcony, and watched as flame consumed paper, reducing my father's words to ash that scattered in the damp air. Nina found me the next afternoon, sitting in my car outside the house I would never own, the house that had come to represent everything I'd lost and everything I'd never had. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't speak at all. She simply slid into the passenger seat beside me, her presence both grounding and immediate in the small space. Outside, rain fell. Not the aggressive downpour of recent weeks, but a gentle, persistent mist that blurred the edges of the world. "How did you find me?" I asked finally, my voice rough from disuse. "You mentioned the address once." She watched the house through the rain-streaked windshield. "It's a nice place." It was. There will be others. That's not why I'm here. Nina nodded, understanding as she always did. "Why are you here?" I considered the question, watching as water gathered on the windshield, small droplets merging into larger ones, tracing paths downward. To say goodbye, I think, not to the house, to something else. We sat in silence for a while longer, watching the rain, the house, the occasional car passing on the wet street. In the quiet, something shifted inside me. Not healing exactly, but a subtle realignment, like bones beginning the slow process of knitting together. "He sent me a letter," I said finally. "My father." "What did it say?" "Nothing that matters anymore." Nina reached across the space between us, her hand finding mine, warm and solid and real. "What happens now?" she asked softly. I looked at the house one last time, the warm lights visible through windows, signs of life within walls that would never shelter me. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of that loss, not just the physical structure, but all it had represented. Security, stability, a place to belong. "Now," I said, turning the key in the ignition, "we go get coffee, and I figure out what comes next." As we drove away, I thought of my mother, her gentle hands, her quiet strength. I remembered something she told me once, after a particularly difficult day at school. "We build homes inside us first, Martin. Everything else is just walls and a roof." I hadn't understood then. I was beginning to now. The rain continued to fall as we left the neighborhood behind, washing away footprints, erasing paths, creating clean slates. I rolled down my window slightly, letting the cool, damp air brush against my face. It smelled of possibilities. "I think," I said to Nina, my voice stronger now, "I might be ready to start over." She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "I think you might be right." Outside, Seattle continued its eternal cycle of cleansing and renewal. Inside, both the car and myself, something similar was happening. Not an ending after all, but a beginning. Not the house I never owned, but the life I was finally ready to claim. Thank you for listening. Your likes and subscriptions help us shine a light on the stories that matter.